Today on our 2009 Subaru Forester, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit, part number RM-152. Now to help us with our installation, we're also going to be using the Pollak 6-pole round pin trailered wiring socket for the vehicle end, part number PK11609. So our diodes are going to install behind our taillights, and they're going to allow us to take the signal from our RV and transfer them to our existing lights on our Subaru so everyone around us knows what's going on, whether we have our taillights on, our turn signals, or our brake lights. Now, since our motorhome has a combined lighting system, which means that our brake lights and our turn signal is going to be the same bulb, on our Subaru, we wired it up so that the brake and turn signals are going to be coming out of this bulb. But when we drive normally, the turn signal on our Subaru is still going to be that separate one. Now, aside from protecting our vehicle, making sure there's no backfeeding, our diodes are going to have a big benefit opposed to a lot of other systems. We're not going to have any switches to flip. We're not going to have to worry about running magnetic lights, putting them on our Subaru and then running a wire all the way to the front and worry about scratches going down the road, because they're going to be permanently installed behind the taillight, which won't change the outward appearance at all. Our diodes are going to be extremely simple to use. We'll simply just hook up the umbilical between our motorhome and our Subaru, and we're ready to have our lights work. So now that we've gone over some of the features of our diodes, let's show you how to get them installed. Now, we went ahead and installed our wiring and ran them and routed everything towards the back while we have the fascia off when we were installing our base plate. And that's just going to make it a lot easier because we're not going to have to contend with the grill or running the wires underneath and fighting all that plastic. And the way we routed it is we came right to where our mounting plug will be on our base plate between these two prongs, and I ran underneath the support and it went under, but then I came up in the engine compartment and I ran it back, and I left myself a loop because some of the braking systems will require to tie into the lighting system. But then I went all the way back to the firewall and dropped it down. So now when I drop my wire down, one thing you do want to be mindful of when you're routing this is you want to stay away from any heat sources or moving parts. So our steering shaft, axle, and a lot of other things are right here, so you want to use some zip ties to secure your wiring. But I dropped it down, I went over the subframe bracket, went over this other bracket here, again using some zip ties to keep them in place, zip tied it to the bottom of the floor, running it along. And then I actually loosened this panel up just a bit, tucked my wire on the inside of it, came to the back side, had my wire go over the rear subframe, over the rear axle, and I had come out towards the side, and I tucked it underneath the edge of this heat shield and zip tied it to the very edge right by this muffler hanger. Now we're going to move up top, and we're going to need to gain access to the back of our taillights, so we have to pull those out. So with the rear hatch open, if we come to our taillights, we're going to have a couple fasteners that are going to be holding them in place. So we're going to want to grab a 10mm socket, and we can pull those two bolts out. And when we remove our taillight, you want to be careful. You don't want to do a whole lot of side-to-side pulling. You may want to wiggle it a little bit side to side to kind of work it loose, but the main idea is to pull straight back. Once we get it loosened up, we'll have our harness here. So if we push it on this gray tab, should be able to unplug it. And if you're having trouble, you may need to get a screwdriver to kind of push in on that tab while you're pulling at the same time. Then we can pull the connector apart, and we're going to set our taillight assembly aside for right now. So with our taillight removed, we're going to have to figure out the function of each wire that's coming out of the back of our connector. You want to make sure you isolate each function while you're testing them. So I have only the headlights turned on, so I'm going to test for my taillight signal. I'm just going to take a circuit tester and go through and probe each one of the pins here until I get a signal. So it looks like we're getting a signal out of this top one, and if we come to the back, we can see it's going to be this pinkish colored wire. Now I'm going to turn my taillights off, and I'm going to be looking for my brake signal. So you're going to want to grab an extra set of hands or put something on the brake pedal and make sure that it's getting fully depressed, and you turn your headlights off. Then we'll repeat that process, going through, probing each one of the pins until we find our brake signal. So this lower center pin, or the brown wire, is going to be our brake signal. Now we're going to want to repeat that entire process over on the passenger side as well. Now on the passenger side, we found that it's going to be the same locations of pins and the same colored wires on the back. We'll have the pink colored wire for our taillight signal and the brown colored wire for our brakes. So now that we've identified the wires, we're going to want to come to the bottom and we're going to want to separate each one of our 4-pole wires. Now to begin with, we're going to start on the driver's side. So we're going to start with our yellow, white, and brown wires, and we're going to get them up to our taillight. To help us get the wire up, I took a pull wire, just had some airline tube laying around. You can use a coat hanger or whatever you have available, but we went down between the body and the bumper here, fed it down until it was coming out the bottom. Now we can take the other end and we're going to attach our brown, white, and yellow wires. I'm just going to use some electrical tape. Then we can pull it up to the top of the taillight socket, making sure we get all the excess slack out. With our wires up top, we'll start with our white wire. Now this is going to be our ground, so we're going to attach it to a spot of sheet metal. So we'll estimate about how much wire we're going to need. And I always like to tie my excess wire up so it won't fall back down. So make a little loop like this. Cut the excess off and strip back the end of the wire. We can take the ring terminal they provide in our kit, we'll slide it over the wire and crimp it in place. Then you're going to want to grab a 5/16 nut driver and we're going to secure that ring terminal directly into the body here. When you put it in, you want to make sure that that ring terminal doesn't move, but you don't want to tighten it down so much that it strips the self-tapping screw out. Now we're going to start making our connections for our diodes. We're going to have to cut back some of this electrical tape to expose the wires on the inside so we can get access to them. So you just want to very carefully remove it, using a knife just to cut a little bit, but you want to be careful not to cut the wire on the inside. And we just peel it back, exposing the wires on the inside here. And we'll go ahead and start with our yellow wire, which is going to be our brake and turn signal. So since it's going to be our brake signal, if you remember, it was the solid brown wire, but as you can see, once we pull that tape back, it's got these yellow tracers on it. So we're going to come downstream from the plug a little bit. We're going to cut the wire in half and strip back both ends. You're going to want to grab one of your diodes that has all blue spade connectors on it. And we're going to take 2 of the connectors off. And we're going to crimp them onto the wire we just cut. We can take the final one off. And if we look at our diode, we're going to have 2 on the inside and 1 on the outside. The out terminal is going to go towards the taillight plug. And then the other end, we're just going to plug into one of the in terminals. And we'll estimate about how much yellow wire we need, again giving ourselves slack so we can tie it up top here. We'll cut the excess wire off, strip back the end, and crimp the last spade terminal onto the yellow wire. And that's going to plug into the other inside on the diode. Now we're going to do the same thing for our taillight circuit. If you remember, it's going to be that pink wire. This time we're going to grab the diode that has the yellow spade terminal on it, but we're going to be using the 2 blue ones right now to go on the wire we just cut. Again, we'll plug it in outside going towards the plug. and the blue one going in one of the insides. And I'll remove the yellow spade terminal. Again, estimate about how much brown wire we need. We'll cut it. This time we're going to hold on to the excess wire, and we're going to strip both ends, the one we cut and the excess. We'll combine the two wires. And both of them are going to be going into the yellow spade terminal. Now we're going to send our brown wire, that excess loose wire, we're going to send it back down so we can meet up with the green wire underneath. So with this side done, we can go and get ready to put our taillight back in place. Now on the back of our diodes we do have this double-sided tape. So if you have enough room, you can stick it either to the side of the body or you can put them together to where they're not going to be banging around inside the taillight housing. So we'll take our connector, plug it back into the housing, make sure it locks in place. Then we can line up all the pins and be mindful of this one back here. It's got this little notch that it needs to slide into along with the pins that go into the body. Our brown wire or green wire is going to route beneath our bumper under the underside of the car and come up through the taillight opening just like we did on the driver's side. However, you'll notice that the brown wire is going to come up a little bit short. So we went ahead and extended it. I had some brown wire laying around, but you can also use the excess white or yellow wire. Now in the kit they do provide you with a butt connector. However, I chose to use a heat shrink butt connector since it is going to be on the outside of the vehicle. So I ran my green and brown wire on top of the fascia support and along the back edge here, going over the next fascia support, and then using the same method to get my wire up, I ran it up to the taillight assembly. And over here on the passenger side, once we brought our wire up, we tied it back to the existing wiring and made our connections just like we did over on the driver's side. So for our taillight connection, we took our brown wire and spliced it into the pink wire, and then our green brake and turn signal we spliced into the brown wire with the silver tracers. We can plug our taillight back in, making sure it locks in place, then we can put it back in. Finally, we can put the hardware back in holding the taillight. Now on the front of our Subaru, we're going to want to separate a little bit of the wires so we can get ready to wire up the plug. So you just want to split them back just a little bit. We don't need to go that far. And then we can grab the actual socket that we're going to be using. Now you'll notice on the side here we're going to have this set screw. So you want to grab a small Phillips screwdriver. We're going to pull that screw out. You want to be careful because these are extremely easy to misplace or lose. So we'll set that aside so we won't lose it. Then we're going to open up the door. And if you can, you kind of reach in. We're going to push the plastic side of the connector out. And we'll pull it out for right now and just set it down. Then we're going to take our wires and we're going to feed them through the back so they're coming out the front and through the door. And depending on how much wire you left yourself, you may need to kind of push it in past the mounting point so we can get access to those wires. And if you need to, you can go ahead and just pull a little bit more slack out of those wires so you have a little bit more to work with. So we'll pull our wires through and we're going to strip back just a little bit off of each one of our wires. Then we can grab the terminal that's going to go inside. Now each one of these is labeled, so it's going to correspond with the colored wire we have, but it is going to be extremely small and kind of hard to see. But if we go around, the T is going to be for trailer marker, which will be our brown wire, G for ground, L for left turn, which is going to be our yellow wire, and R for right turn. So we're just going to loosen up the little set screws inside of there and match it up with the corresponding wire, and then we could tighten it down. And a good rule of thumb with these wires, you want to make sure you get the entire wire in there so it doesn't cross over and cause any kind of shorts. And we'll just go through and connect each wire to the corresponding terminal. Now that we have our connections made, we're going to want to put our terminal back into the socket. Now you'll notice that there's that small hole. We want to do our best to line it up with the hole that's on the outside. Now it will only go in one way, so it won't fully seat if it's not in there properly, but we can kind of use the wires on the back to our advantage to help get it into position. But it can be a little cumbersome trying to get everything to line up properly. Once we have the inside terminal lined up, we'll be able to see the hole lined up with the outside. So then you want to take that small set screw, just get it started real loosely, and come back with the screwdriver and tighten it up. And that'll keep the terminal inside from spinning inside the socket. Now at the back here, it is going to be open, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of electrical tape, I'm going to wrap it all up, hopefully preventing any kind of moisture or debris from getting inside. So I'm going to take a couple self-tapping screws that were provided with the base plate. I'm just going to screw the bracket directly into the post on there. And we have full access, being able to open the door without having to worry about hitting the bumper. Now one last thing we need to do is test our system to make sure everything's working properly. So we have our tester hooked up with a 7 to 6-way cord so we can see that the diodes are working. So if I turn on my tester, we can see that the taillights are working, as well as the left turn signal, the brake lights, and our right turn signal. All we have left to do now is hook up to our motorhome and hit the road. That'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Universal High Power Diode Wiring Kit, part number RM-152 on our 2009 Subaru Forester.